Hey guys, welcome to NTFS, Introduction to NTFS File System. We've already kind of covered the FAT file system. We're going to do a quick overview of NTFS today. And then next week we're going to get into, again, NTFS a little bit more in depth. So we're going to kind of look at an overview, kind of briefly touch on some of the components of the master file table. And then next week we'll go dig down, drill down a little deeper into the master file table and see all the juicy details that are in there. So without further ado, let's jump in. Um, One thing you need to know is that in the master file table, I mean in NTFS file system, unlike the FAT file system, uh, everything in NTFS is a file. So if you recall from the FAT file system, there's a whole chunk of the disk reserved at the beginning for um, system files, or not files, but system data, etc. So you had your volume boot record, and then you had your some reserve space, then you had your file allocation tables. In the earlier versions of FAT, we had the root directory in the system data area, and then in FAT32, it moved out to the data section of the disk. Well, in NTFS, everything is a file. Everything is stored as files in NTFS. So there's none of this just kind of space sitting there in the disk that's used by the system that doesn't show up as files. Everything shows up as file. So including what would be the equivalent of the FAT table, the file allocation table in the FAT file system, the equivalent of that would be the master file table. And that's sort of not totally true because the FAT tables are kind of a bitmap, right, as we discussed previously, whereas the master file table is more like a directory entry with metadata. So it's um, and even that's not totally accurate, but you'll see more what I mean as we get into that. So, um, what we really need to focus on when we're looking at an NTFS file system are these file system files, which are typically hidden from the end user. Of course, any forensic utility will see them. In fact, if you want to see them in Windows, you can. You just have to go up to your Windows Explorer, Tools, Options, View, and then uncheck Hide System Files, and they'll show up. And typically where they are located is in the root directory. So let's bounce back and forth between the slideshow here and the root directory. Um, so here we are in FTK Imager, and you'll notice I've got the project from I think for the final is in here, so you can take a look at it, get a little preview. If you haven't already downloaded it, you can. By the way, I sent out an email a while back with my Gmail Google Docs account linked to this. So um, here it is. Uh, we've got the image, we've got the partition, we've got the volume. Okay, and then in the volume we have the root directory, and in the root directory you will see all of the typical Windows operating system install folders, but you'll also see all of these $ uh, attribute metadata files, these $ metadata files they're called, and these are all indicative of the NTFS file system. Anytime you see a $ before a file, that means it is a system metadata file, and it contains any number of useful or not so useful information. All right, so that's NTFS in a nutshell. We've got these metadata files, and we'll kind of look at some of those. Okay, so um, and that's designated by the $. Okay, all right. So here I go again. The primary or the most important, arguably the most important NTFS file system file is the $master file table, MFT. Um, it tracks every file on the system, including itself, right? So it's basically a master index. It's an index of the entire volume in one location. And it makes references to other index files like the $I30 file, right? Which appears in every directory. So each directory has its own $I30 index file, right? Very similar to the index file we saw in the root directory of the FAT file system. You have a directory, but it's a file that exists in each file folder, basically, and it contains a list of metadata for all the contents of that folder. So, for example, if we are looking here in the root directory, you will see here that there is in fact a $I30 file. Now that is not for the entire drive, of course, it's just for the root directory. So this is the $I30 file for the root directory, and so you'll see a listing here of all of these metadata files. So for example, I just highlighted $log file. I mean, if you want to see $log file, it's right there. There it is. All right, in the root directory. But we're looking now at the $I30 file in there, and it is a listing or an index of all of the files within the root directory. If I were to go out to a random directory like the users directory right there, I just highlight the users directory, and sure enough, there's a $I30 index file within the directory called users. Now the cool thing is that all of the $I30 files reference data or information that is in the MFT. Okay, so the master file table it talks to all of those $I30 files and contains information from the indexes of all of those directories. So each file in the master file table, or each file on the entire volume, is indexed in a fashion in the master file table, the MFT. So that's why it's such a really important file for us to look at as forensic examiners. All right, so each entry in the master file table, okay, is 2 sectors. So it's 1024 bytes in length, and if there's too much metadata for a given file to fit within 1024 bytes, then the MFT will create a second entry for it and reference that second entry. But typically, most of the time, you are going to see just one entry per file, unless it's an absolutely enormous file and it's been changed and moved and all kinds of stuff. Then you're probably just going to see this one entry that's 2 sectors long. So whoops, God damn it, there we go. So what does that look like in real life if we go back to our FTK imager? So here we're at the very beginning of the master file table, looking at it in hex view. That's great. So here's one sector. So that's half of the first entry. And then this next sector, which as you can see is mostly blank, is the second half of the first entry. And then you'll notice down here, you'll see kind of this deja vu thing going on. There's a file signature or an entry signature, an entry header for each entry in the master file table, and they all start with this hex 46494C45, which spells file in ASCII, right? So we can see it over here on the text side. So every 2 sectors or every 1024 bytes, you'll see a new entry in the master file table. Okay, so that's pretty easy, not too hard to remember. Okay, and each entry, which is sometimes called a file record, has this header that is, it has the header signature, which is FILE. And then, so starting with offset 0 of each entry, the next 56 bytes are what we would call the header of that entry. So it contains sort of a group of metadata, byte strings, that tell us a little bit more about the contents of that entry. Okay, so it's kind of metadata about metadata. We're kind of doing this inception thing, a dream within a dream within a dream. So I mean, the master file table is metadata about the about every file on the disk or the volume. Each entry within the master file table is metadata about a given file on that particular volume. And then within the entry, right, within the entry for that file, there's a header, and the header contains metadata about the rest of the information in the header. So it breaks it down. It's pretty systematic, but the first 56 bytes are the header. So let's look at that again. Let's see. So there's 16 bytes, there's 32 bytes, and there's, no, let's see, did I do that right? 16 bytes, 32 bytes. What is that? 48 bytes. And then 56 bytes right there. Yeah, so there you go. There's the header for the first entry within the master file table. Now, I'll let you guess what is the first entry in the master file table. So entry number 0 in the master file table is what? What file do you think is indexed first in the master file table? Well, if you guessed the master file table, you're correct. So the very first entry in the master file table is the master file table. So we are looking here at this first two sectors here. What we're looking at is metadata about the master file table in the master file table. So it gets a little freaky if you've not thought of that before, but it's not too bad. So, I mean, let's just just in case you're confused about metadata in the master file table about the master file table, let's go down and look at the next two sectors. This is the entry for the $MFT mirror. Okay, so if you look up here in the root directory, there's the master file table, and right below it's the master file table mirror. It's just a redundant master file table. It's the first few bytes of the master file table. Basically, it's all of these entries that you see in the root directory, all of these file system files, those are mirrored or cloned within the MFT mirror. So the MFT mirror doesn't show all of the files on the volume like the master file table does. It just is a mirror or a duplicate of the important file system metadata files. Okay, so anyway, that's what we're looking at in the master file table right now. Entry number 1 is the master file table, and the first 56 bytes are metadata about this entry. All right, hopefully I haven't beaten that dead horse too much. I've already told you this. This is kind of covered this already, but the first 4 bytes of each entry is called the entry signature, or the file signature. It's just FILE. So that's how you know you're looking at the master file table. That helps. The next couple of bytes, 4 and 5. I'm sorry, that's not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I was gonna, yeah, boy, I kind of blew that. Hold on a second. Now I gotta look stupid. Hold on. Man. Gee. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm adjusting my PowerPoint animation to add an animation. It's supposed to be on click. Yeah. Sorry for the delay. Very unprofessional. Supremely disappointed in myself. All right. So we are back in action. Here's the next couple of bytes in the header, right, is called the fix-up array, and that occupies offset 0, 4, and 0, 5. So position 5 and position 6. I'm going to sneeze. Oh my goodness. Remember that nerdy little kid from elementary school that always had allergies and asthma and stuff? Fortunately, I don't have asthma, but I'm still that nerdy little kid with allergies, always sneezing, coughing, hacking. Okay, all right. So, and then the next 2 bytes, offset 6 and 7, are the number of entries in the fix-up array. Well, what the heck is a fix-up array, you're wondering? Actually, it's a little confusing. We're just going to cover it very cursory overview of the fix-up array. So those are the 2 bytes we're talking about that tell where the fix-up array is. And then these 2 bytes tell us how many bytes are in the fix-up array. And actually what it tells us how many byte pairs are in the fix-up array, right? So let's start with this one. It tells us that it's at hex 30 from the beginning of the entry, right? So if this is 0, and now we're at offset 04, And offset 04 is telling us that the fix-up array is at hex 30. Well, what's 3 times 16? 3 times 16 is 48, is that right? And then so we go down here to 1, 2, 3, there we go. 3 times 16. See how easy hex is really when you think about when you've got your hex viewer set up in 16 row or 16 columns, then when you know that you're at 30, you just know your 3 rows, right? 3 times 16. So that's kind of the cool thing about using the hex offset viewer over here on the right hand side, because this 30 corresponds with this 30 right here, right? I mean, when this 30 is actually giving us an offset count. You can right click in FTK Imager. I don't know if you knew this. This is kind of a tangent. You can right click in FT Imager and say show decimal offsets. And now I've just converted this, so now it's this is 0 and this is 15 and then this is 16, and you see the offset counter down the left hand column is in decimal, or you can right click and put it back in hex. Just turn off show decimal offsets. All right, so back to the fix-up array. It tells us that it starts here on hex 30, which is decimal 48. It also tells us here that it's going to occupy 3 2-byte strings. Okay, so that means it's going to go 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3. Okay, and a fix-up array is just a way for the master file table to do some error checking on itself. So it's going to say, hey, this is an integer I'm going to look for later. It originally was had to do with these 4 bytes, but we changed it to this hex 8200, and I'm going to look for that later. And where does it look for it? It looks for it at the last 2 bytes of each sector to make sure that nothing's been fracked up. So you're going to go down here, and there's the hex 8200, the first sector, and then down here hex 8200 for the second sector, and that's how it knows that those sectors haven't been jacked up. Okay, so and so each one of these is going to be different. Each fix-up array is going to be different for each entry, right? So if we go to the next entry down on the master file table and we say, well, where is it? Oh, it's in the same place. That's good. I lied. I said it was going to be different. Look at that. It's the same. That surprises me. I didn't realize. You know what? It must change it periodically because I don't remember them being the same. All right, now I look stupid. Stupider. I look even dumber than I did. All right. Anyway, that's the fix-up array. Like I said, I don't expect you to know any more about it than I do, which is clearly not a lot at this point. I got to go do my homework and research the fix-up array. I did know more about it at one time, but not something I used a lot in my forensic examination. So there you have it. Sounds like I'm making excuses for myself, but I'm not. Totally not. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. See what happens when you stray from the PowerPoint and you start speaking extraneously. Is that the right word? Extemporaneously. That's the word. Uh, don't do that if you're ever giving a lecture. Never speak extemporaneously. Stick to the PowerPoint. All right, moving on. That's the fix-up array. Oh, I could have done that. Did I do that? I could have been like, hey, oh, PowerPoint, there's that, and there's that. I went through all that trouble to fix my PowerPoint, and then I didn't even use it. What an idiot. All right, moving on. $ log file transaction entry. Okay, so the next 8 bytes in the master file table entry are called the log file transaction number. All right, so from offset 08 to 15 is the log file transaction number. What does that mean? Again, I don't expect you to get into any depth or details about this, but let's just take a quick peek at it. Let's speak extemporaneously again and see if I can talk myself into a a hole. Perfect. All right, so let's see, where are we? Right there. I see those 8 bytes are the log file entry number. Now, if I were to right click on that and say copy hex, and then I were to go to the log file, and you've got the set log file portion, and then you've got the record, the record, the record, infinite record portion of the log file. And so we're going to go see the infinite record is just, it's going to, for every time a file is changed or updated in the whole system, in the whole volume, the log file attribute basically logs that there was a change to this file. Okay, so what's the log number for the master file table? Well, we right clicked and copied it. So now we're going to go over here into the hex of the log file, and we're going to say find next. No, oh, well, that's not really, look at that. Let's go back to the beginning. I didn't want to go find next. I wanted to say find. And then look at that. See, I've paste in that entry number, which is hex 65 David Bravo 211 Bravo, and then all zeros. You by default, it's usually on text. We're going to click binary, and then we're going to go find, and then it goes down and finds that entry in the log file. Okay, now each log file entry is like 4096 bytes long, and that's a lot of, that's 8 sectors, right? So you could scroll up to the beginning. Let's see, and usually the name happens to show up down here around the 6th sector. So we got to scroll up like 6 sectors before we can find the beginning of the entry for this record. We're getting close. I can feel it. There it is. So RCRD is the entry header for each record in the log file. I don't expect you to know this or remember it. All I'm doing is showing you how the master file table correlates with the other metadata attributes in the NTFS file system. So let's go back to the master file table. And so we now know that these 8 bytes over here point to the log file entry. Okay, so you can see we've already, master file tables talking to the $sign I30. It's talking to the log file. It's talking to a lot of different metadata files out there to kind of keep track of every file that's out there. All right, so back to our PowerPoint. See, I didn't do too bad that time. I didn't look too dumb. That's good. All right, so now we need to talk about some of the most important attributes within the master file table. And there's a whole bunch of them, right? There's a whole bunch of metadata that can appear in the master file table. But for this class, and really, I mean, for most forensic exams, the most you're going to be concerned with are the standard information attribute, the file name attribute, and the data attribute. Okay, and each one of those attributes has a little hex signature that lets us know which attribute we're looking at. And if you're looking at the PowerPoint here, you can see that the standard information attribute starts with hex 101010 or 100000. The file name attribute starts with hex 30, and the data attribute starts with hex 80. So let's see what that looks like just really quickly in the master file table. So we're looking at the entry in the master file table for the master file table. And if you go down right here, and I'll tell you how I found this in just a second, but if you look at this right there, those 3 bytes, that is the header for the standard information attribute. And I know that the next several bytes right there comprise metadata for the standard information attribute. And then you see there's the hex 30 or the file name attribute. And we know that the file name attribute goes down for a certain number of bytes. And all of that I've got highlighted in blue there is metadata called the file name attribute. And then we would go down, for example, one more here is the data attribute. And so you see that we've got this information about where data for the master file table resides. Now, you'll notice there is a second, look, no, never mind. Let's see, I didn't go far enough. Looks like this one probably goes down further, maybe to here or to here. Yeah, I think that's, I'll have to double check, but that's the data attribute. And then you can see there's a 4000, and then there's another 400. So there are some other data or some other metadata attributes within the master file table, but we're not too concerned about those. What I'm concerned about, like I said, are these three: the standard information attribute, the file name attribute, and the data attribute, which we will cover in much more depth next week. Okay, so this week we're just looking at kind of an overview of the master file table. All right, so if you go down here to offset 20 and 21, that tells us the number of bytes to the first attribute. And that's how I knew where to look for that hex 100000, is I knew that it was 56 bytes down, right? How do I know it's 56 bytes down? Well, because it tells me right here in offset 20 and 21 of the header, of the MFT entry header, it tells me that it's hex 38 or 56 bytes. So if we go back, whoops, I didn't want to do that yet. We go back to FTK Imager and we take a look, and we go right here to 20 and 21, offset 20 and 21. You can use your hex value interpreter over here, and it tells you it's 56 bytes, right? Or I could just go 3, 3, 3, and then 8. See how easy hex is? I already told you that, but I'm just gloating now because that's so easy, right? Hex 3, 8. Well, I know I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then 8. And there, right after that, is the first attribute, otherwise known as the standard information attribute, which we'll cover more next week. But there is a basic overview of the master file table, the master file table entry, in this case, the entry for the master file table. And what the first 56 bytes generally are used for that are useful to us as forensic examiners. I hope that was useful to you. If you have any questions, text me or email me. I will be out of town this weekend. I'm going to a wedding in California. I will have, of course, my phone with me. I will respond to emails and text messages, but I will not be checking them as regularly as normal since I will be out of my normal environment and surroundings. So please, if you have questions, text me and let me know that you have a question. If it's complicated, send me an email and I'll respond in kind. That's all I've got for you. Hopefully that's helpful. One last thing, not related to the master file table or to the NTFS file system. Some students have expressed some concerns about assignments that have changed at the last minute and some inconsistencies or apparent inconsistencies in the rubric. And all I can do first and foremost is apologize for any confusion that our course shell has caused. The course shell is shared by myself and other professors who teach this class, and so sometimes changes are made to the shell without any communication because we all live in different, potentially different time zones or teach at different times or and make updates and changes. And so there's sometimes things are not always consistent. So I apologize for that. Now, as far as last minute changes to the assignments go, when I've done that a couple times, some of you have complained, and here's why I hope you don't complain too much. Because when I make changes, I'm generally trying to make the assignment easier. Not because I don't believe you're capable of rigorous things, but because this is a condensed course. It is online, and so we are doing 3 times the work, or 3 times as quickly. We're doing the same amount of work, but we're doing it in a third of the time. So essentially, it's 3 times as work in the time frame. So, for example, the RAID assignment, if the assignment for a 15-week on-ground, on-campus course asks you to build a RAID in VM and then image it and then reconstruct it using a utility. I can't expect you to do that. That would take most people, many hours, and would be one assignment in a week, right? In addition to maybe a paper or something. But you guys are doing like 3 papers and 3 labs a week, or you're doing a lot of work. And so I'm really trying to decrease the amount of work that assignment took. And I added one more thing in there that said, hey, if you can't rebuild the RAID because you don't have access to a forensic suite, explain why, right? And that gave a couple of students some heartburn because they're like, oh, you changed it at the last minute. I did, but I was trying to make it easier, so I hope that helps. The other thing is that the rubric is not terribly consistent, and some one or two of you have expressed concern that I'm indiscriminately or unfairly shaving points off of your assignments for the rubric, based on the rubric, which is not consistent from assignment to assignment to assignment. So again, I apologize that the rubrics are not always consistent. But, and if you feel like I've made a mistake, if you look at the rubric and go, wait a minute, why did he take points off there? That doesn't make sense. By all means, shoot me a text, email me, tell me, hey, Frank, on this assignment, on this section of the rubric, you docked points from me, and I did it, or whatever. Bring it to my attention. I'm human. I make mistakes. I'll go back and I'll look at it, and if I need to regrade it and change your grade, I certainly will. Okay. Um, so don't hesitate to send me a request to relook at a grade that I gave you. The other thing is two more things. There's one thing that is consistent on every rubric. It may be worded a little bit differently, but they all ask for APA format with references. Okay, and as I've stated in the past, certainly in my one-on-one class and here, I think I've already stated it, but if I haven't, I'll restate it. You have to list expert sources. When you write a report or you do a lab as a student, you need to be citing expert sources. Whether you're quoting them or paraphrasing them, doesn't matter to me. Just put an in-text citation saying, yeah, I got this, I'm going to say some information about file systems. The $MFT record is the most important one in the NTFS file system. Parentheses, carrier 2008 or 2005 or whatever version of the book we're using, right? And then at the bottom of your report, list your resources. Carrier 2005, file system forensics. So you need those two elements in order for it to be really academically appropriate. You got to have expert material in the body or the narrative of your report or your lab. You need to then parenthetically give them credit that points to your resource page, and then on your resource page you have to list the full reference, right? So if I'm reading something that doesn't seem right and I see where you got the information, then I can go to your references at the bottom and I can click on it, or I can go find it and say, oh, okay, I see what, or I can say, no, this is wrong, and I can point that out to the class so that not everybody makes the same mistake. All right, so it's really important that you follow, and I don't care about the APA format. You can use APA, you can use MLA. I really don't care. But the assignment calls for APA. I'm not going to dock points if you're make one indentation off on your APA. I don't care about that. If you get the title and the publisher out of order, I don't care about that. What I care about is that you are listing all of the information and that it points to information within your assignment. And then the last thing I want to say is that if you have real heartache with, again, your grade, and you're looking at the rubric and you're like, oh crap, I missed that part of the rubric, or oh yeah, he's right, I didn't do that right, shoot me a text and say, hey, Frank, I would like to resubmit this. After reviewing the rubric, I see I left out some stuff. Can I resubmit the assignment? Generally, I'll give you one redo, right, per assignment. If you really botch it, if you really didn't. I don't know how many professors out there do that. I suspect not many, but I'm not trying to jack anybody up here, guys, and this has always been my policy. If you screw up an assignment and it's really bad, and you were like expecting 95% on it or 100%, and you come back and it's a 45 or a 50%, you're like, oh crap, right? Look at the rubric. If I made a mistake, I'll fix it. If you made a mistake, you fix it, and then let me know that you resubmitted it, and we'll take another look at it. Okay, so that's all I've got. That really is all I've got. I'm done ranting. I hope that was helpful to you. Again, we will see you next week. The final, or not the final, the midterm and the midterm practical is Sunday night, due Sunday night. Because I'm not going to be as available, if you have real problems with it and it's stuff that I haven't covered in class, let me know, and I may or may not grant an extension. But I'm pretty confident that based on all of my YouTube lectures and all of the lectures that are in the shell and all of the reading in the book, if you've done everything you're supposed to do, you're going to know everything on the midterm. Okay, so that's why I'm not really too concerned about a midterm review. I think you should know everything that's on there, and we'll make adjustments on the fly if we have to. But I'm not too worried about it. I think we've covered everything pretty thoroughly. So. I think that really is it. I really am done now. Over and out.